Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salam ala nabiyillah wa ba'd. To continue our Thursday sessions, where from time to time we go over beneficial topics and we address ourselves with issues that need to be addressed, inshallah. From the topics that I felt that was important to go over is the matter of tasweer, picture taking, and in specific photography and videotaping and using the devices that we have today. For verily, from time to time we have questions that arise regarding what is the stance of our ulama and what is the correct view concerning it. So I thought that it was important that we clarify what is mentioned regarding this topic in detail. As well, this is part of knowledge. It's part of seeking knowledge, to know the views and the opinions of our scholars and how they came to their conclusion. For verily, from the past, we knew that there was books written regarding the opinions of Imam Ahmed and the opinions of Imam Shafi'i and the opinions of Imam Malik and so on, as well of some of the stages that they went through, from different narrations that were conveyed. Sometimes we find that they may say a statement at the early part of their life and then they recant it later on. If this shows anything, it shows their sincerity, their ikhlas, that al-haq dalatul mu'min, the truth is the last thing for the believer. Wherever he finds it, حَيْثُ وَجَدَهَا أَخَذَهَا, wherever he finds it, he takes it. So we're going to see that with our great prominent scholars of our time, that they may had a view regarding this issue, and then later on with debates and academic research and perhaps seeing certain affairs in reality, we see that they have perhaps changed their stance. And we're going to see this, inshallah. We're going to play. And I did some basic research of looking of the dates of the different fatawas, as well certain fatawa, we know the verdicts are not dated, but they have context to show around roughly what time by either the questioner or the people that were present, or who issued the fatwa along with that person. So I did some research to look and to see what were the actual opinions of our scholars and what they died upon. And this is from al-aman al-ilmiya, they say. Academic honesty is a trust that when we ascribe opinions to our scholars, we ascribe it with precision and accurately. For verily, we have seen people pertaining to this matter, they have ascribed opinions loosely to our scholars, and this shows a lack of respect for their juhud, their efforts, that someone could come without any real concern, which is the past or the later opinion of a scholar, just to take whatever he wish and ascribe it to the scholar. It is important that a person looks to what was the actual opinion and what he perhaps recanted from. And sometimes we see some of these verdicts, the scholars perhaps gave a verdict that was restricted, and then people came and misused it. SubhanAllah. They misused it and they expanded from what was initially intended by that verdict. And then later on, people, when they do certain acts, they ascribe it back to that scholar, which is not from aman al-ilmiya, not from the academic trust. So we're going to mention the four great ulama of our time, their stance pertaining to the matter of tasweer. Just doing dirasa, studying amongst ourselves. But really, this is a form of knowledge, as we mentioned. It comes on some of the Salaf, Sa'id ibn Abi Aruba and others, that they said, al-ilm معرفة اختلاف الناس. Knowledge is knowing the difference of opinion and knowing what scholars have said and what they have came to a conclusion and their proofs. As well, this is to show that a person actually listens to other people's argument. Perhaps they may come with something that of proof, and not to be narrow-minded regarding it. So when a person, he sees and he knows, and then when he comes later on to a conclusion, is more comforting for the soul and comforting for the person, that after realizing what has been said, he comes to a conclusion that he believes will bring him closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and which is accordance to the text. So with no doubt, what's upon a person is to follow the Book of Allah and the Sunnah of Muhammadin sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. For verily, an-nas yataghayyarun, people, they change. One day a person may hold opinion, and the next day he may change it. So do not make your deen muta'alliq bi-ashkhas. Do not make it attached to men. Whereas in amana, amant, wa in kafar, kafart. That if he believes, you believe, and if he disbelieves, you disbelieve. But be a person that follows the text. Tadur ma'ad dalil haythu dar. You go with the proofs wherever it goes. And this is something of our concern, inshallah. So we're going to mention those four great imams. We'll start with Nasir al-Din al-Albani rahimahullah. Then we'll start with Muhammad bin Salih al-Uthaymeen stance. And then we'll mention the stance of Imam Muqbil. As well, we'll mention the stance of Shaykh Bin Baz rahimahullah. And we'll mention other great prominent scholars of our time, the senior ulama, and as well those who are known for their knowledge. And even we'll mention the stance of scholars that we perhaps do not know of them, but they're as well known and they have spoken about this issue. So inshallah, I'm going to clarify the stance of Albani rahimahullah by first playing his clip, and this is after listening to a number of his audios and going through. For verily the Silsilatul Huda wa Nur, the audios of Shaykh Albani rahimahullah, there are numbers, table of contents that a person could go back to listen to some of the verdicts, and as well to hear what he has mentioned in different fatawas. So to know the exact stance of this great scholar pertaining to this matter. And I'm going to mention here one of the later audios. We're going to play it here for Shaykh Albani rahimahullah, and then we're going to clarify what was been ascribed to this imam, inshallah. Bismillah.
أن يستعملوا الصور بكل أنواعها وأشكالها ما دامت من ذوات الأرواح. أما الكلية التي ذكرتها فهي سواء كانت يدوية أو كانت فوتوغرافية أو كانت الفيديو.
So here, Shaykh Albani rahimahullah, he says that tasweer, picture taking, it's haram in all of its types, whether it be photography or whether it be with the hand of drawing, as well what has occurred now, new devices through the video, of videotaping and the camera. He said that all of this falls under the general prohibition.
هذه الصورة كلها والعامة. الصورة الأخرى هي التي يضطر إليها المسلم والاضطرار له أنواع وأشكال. وبالنسبة لعامة الناس صور الهويات والجوازات ونحو ذلك.
So now, after mentioning that it's prohibited for the people to make these type of images through these devices, he mentions that it's allowed in a state of darura, a necessity, and he says the darura is of various types in relation to the people individually, It's like similar to passports, ID cards, and so on and so forth. And then he's going to mention a different type.
بالنسبة لخاصة الناس كالأطباء مثلا فقد يضطرون لتصوير صورة شخص لتشخيص مرضه مثلا، وكتصوير بعض الهيئات الحكومية لبعض الأشخاص المعروفين بالإجرام بالسرقة بالنهب بالسلب ونحو ذلك.
So then after that he gives specific scenarios of other type of ضرورات. He said, for example, medically speaking, where sometimes a person, a doctor, may have to resort to using these filming equipment to come to a conclusion of the sickness of the person, and videotape and so forth. So this type of picture taking and imaging, he said it stands in a form of ضرورة to save that person from harm.
لاتخاذ ذلك وسيلة للقضاء على الجريمة، فما دار حول هذا النوع من الصور جاز استعمالها، وإلا لم يجوز، وكانت الصورة محرمة لأنها تمنع دخول الملائكة كما تعلمون من الحديث صحيح: لا تدخل الملائكة بيتا فيه صورة أو كلب.
طيب, as well from the affairs that he gave specific forms of ضرورة is that which is relating to affairs of the government for the safety of the country and to prevent these type of affairs. They may do surveillance or follow-up for a great crime that may affect the whole country at large. These type of affairs, he sees it to be in that position of al-durura in this day and age. As well, Shaykh Albany rahimahullah gives other examples relating to the affairs of governments with the affair of war and surveillance relating to countries that wish to harm its safety and security for the whole country. So there's other examples with that affair. There is a scenario, because we find some people now, they come and ascribe to Shaykh Albani rahimahullah permissibility of the affair of what we see now, of people being loose with the matter of videotaping and so forth, or images as a whole, that he did give an exception in relation to making use of those images. So being that they already exist, he said, for example, in a scenario that for a person who cannot learn, for example, Hajj, except by the means of seeing it on television and so forth, here he sees it not only permissible, but he says perhaps it must be close to being mandatory if he doesn't know how to perform Hajj except by way of that. Because he said that he believes the opinion of Hajj cannot be learnt by mere words. It has to be learned practically, and if he sees that a person has no other way of learning Hajj except by this affair, there then he is permitted of making use of the affair of what is already there, not to generate images or to initiate the affair. As well, he gives the conditions for the affair of picture taking for what we find for children. And here we're going to listen to him, these conditions, so to see what people have ascribed is not exact in the words.
إذا كان لا بد من هذه الصورة، بمعنى أن التلاميذ لا يفهمون كلام الأستاذ إلا بهذه الصورة. ثانيا، لا يوجد هناك وسيلة أخرى لتفهيم هذا الطالب المراد من كلام الأستاذ إلا بهذه الصورة. حينئذ نقول لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله.
So here you can hear it clearly. This is a clip, and the full audios are available online as well. It's available on Silsilat al-Huda wa Nur for Shaykh Albani rahimahullah, where he says that in a scenario where a teacher finds no other way of explaining something to a student except through importing an image, there then it becomes permissible. And he says he has as well with the condition that he has no other means. Because he says here, we say in the States, he doesn't even say the word permissible, he just says we say La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. Meaning that this is a state that a person we hope that he may have an excuse for. So Shaykh Albany rahimahullah, one should not understand from his words that he permits what people do now for videotaping of lectures. Really want to read here his words. He says, answering a question pertaining to that, he says, فَلَا يَجُوزُ إِسْتِعْمَالَ الصُّوَرْ مَهْمَا تَعَدَّدَتْ الْأَسَالِيبِ سواء كانت باليد أو بالآلة الفوتوغرافية أو بالفيديو وهي آلة. He said it's not permissible to make use of images no matter what type of approach that has been taken place upon, or whatever method that's been carried out, whether it be by the hand or the photography or through videos, which is a device. He says فإن ذلك لا يجوز إلا في حالة الضرورة كصور الهويات مثلا. So that's not permissible except in a state of ضرورة, similar to ID cards, والجوازات, passports, ونحو ذلك, and that which is similar. And then he says أما التوسع الذي نراه في العصر الحاضر. He says, as for being so loose concerning this topic of what we see in the modern day, أنه إنسان مثلا يريد أن يلقي محاضرة فيطلع في التلفاز وين الضرورة. He says where we see a person, when he wants to give a lecture, he comes on television, or where we find that which is similar. He says, what is the ضرورة? Where is the ضرورة here? And he goes, بالعكس المعرض نفسه للتلفاز يعرض نفسه للفتنة. He said, well, usually we see the opposite, that the person who exposes himself to coming on television is exposing himself to fitna. He says, شوفوني ها أنا بينما إذا كان المقصود هو التعليم. Where he says, look at me. Well, we see in most of the people, we see the negative effects, it's true. And many of the people, they've been trialed with making their image appear online when they're giving a lecture or talk. Sometimes they get so concerned about their looks and how they may display themselves or who they wish to seek of attention. So it is a fitna. Shaykh Albani rahimahullah is saying that there is a harm بينما إذا كان المقصود هو التعليم فيحصل بمجرد أن يسمع الناس كلام المتكلم وهذا كاف في تحقيق المصالح الشرعية. He said if the intention is to really teach the people, he said that occurs by the people merely hearing the speech of the speaker. This is sufficient in fulfilling what was intended by the legislation of benefits. That's one fatwa. As well, he says, on another fatwa, questions from Australia, أسئلة أسترالية, he says, فالآن كما نشاهد مع الأسف توسع الناس جدا جدا في استعمال الصور حتى أصبح من جملة الملاهي. He said, in this day and age, we see, unfortunately, people becoming really, really loose about this topic and using images to the point it became of a means of entertainment. Images and taking pictures has become an image of entertainment or a fear of entertainment. He says, وتجد طفلا ابن 9 سنين واضع الكاميرا على كتفه. He says, you find a young child, 9 years old, placing a camera on his shoulder, وهو يذهب هنا وهناك. He's going from here to there. ويصور ما بدا له. And he's recording or taking pictures of whatever is apparent from. هذا التوسع الأصل فيه تحريم. He says, being loose like this, the origin regarding it is impermissibility. ولكن ما هو الشيء الذي يمكن استثناؤه من باب الضرورات تبيح المحظورات وضرورات تقدر بقدرها. So he said, what is that which is exceptional? That when a ضرورة, we know it permits that which is initially made haram. And ضرورة at the same time, he said, is specific to the amount of the ضرورة. He said, for example, he gives the تنظيم الدخول والخروج من بلد إلى آخر, that people have the system of traveling or entering countries from one to a place to another. They need pictures and images for that affair. He says, فَهُنَا لَابُدْ مِنْ صُورَةٍ. He said, this is what we can enter in the qa'idah of ضرورات in this day and age. And as well, he speaks about the topic of the toy for Aisha, and he's on the opinion that if it was permitted for Aisha for that benefit, he said من باب الأولى أن نبيح ما هو أضر أو أشد ضرورة للمجتمع الإسلامي من لعب السيدة عائشة في بيتها. So he sees from the affair of the toy of Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha that we can permit that which is a greater of necessity or أشد ضرورة for the society at large. And we've seen the examples that he has given, and we know that is not in relation to lectures and talks that are given. But really, the Shaykh says that yes, there is a benefit in that to perhaps see the person, but he says, I do not see that has reached to a level of durura. As well, Shaykh Albany rahimahullah, in Silsilatul Huda wa Nur, tape 393, he says here, the translation, I fear that the Salafiyun one day will say photography isn't picture making. You just press a button. SubhanAllah. And this is true. Now, great numbers of people, they say you're not really you're not capturing an image, or you're not producing an image. You're just pressing a button. And we're going to speak about that later when other mashayikh speak about that affair. So that is in relation to Shaykh Albani rahimahullah. The next scholar we wanted to speak about is Al-Allama Muhammad bin Salih Al-Uthaymeen rahimahullah. And Shaykh Muhammad bin Salih Al-Uthaymeen, before we speak about him, just want to remind the brothers that this issue of photography, this khilaf, it appeared, the first time it appeared, or else it was something that it was known that it was deemed as picture taking, and it was included amongst the prohibition. The first person to permit it was a man, or they said it had been ascribed, a man by the name as the Mufti previous of Egypt in his time, Muhammad Bakhit al-Muti'i. He wrote a book titled Al-Jawab al-Kafi في أن جواز التصوير بالفوتوغرافي, the permissibility of photography, and he died in 1935. He was the first person to introduce this opinion. And even things have been mentioned regarding who he was and so forth, but generally this is the first person who introduced this first khilaf and this wording. So from his time until later, after research, what is apparent that those who took on that stance later on were people from the region of Egypt, of Misr, and people that are even well known, some of them, for even deviation, some of them, like particular Yusuf Qardawi after that, as well as Sayyid Sabiq, and others of Egyptians well known who held on to this opinion, Muhammad Rashid Ridwan. But as for our well-known scholars that we know for, and we usually quote, none of them from that time took on to that opinion, except later on that it said was Muhammad bin Salih al-Uthaymeen rahimahullah. He was from what we know, أول من اشتهر, the first from our well-known scholars who held this opinion, that he himself went through a number of stages. His first stage was the opinion that these devices of photography and so forth is not included of picture taking. He sees that it's just a device that's doing it, and the person is not actually carrying it out. So that was his first stage, Shaykh Muhammad Salih al-Uthaymeen. Then later on, through the time of his life, he went through another stage. And we're going to see that where his stage after that was permitting the affair of video and not permitting photography, especially the ones that are done for dhikra, memorials and so forth. Here I'll read you a fatwa. that it was asked ما حكم تصوير ذوات الأرواح في كاميرا الفيديو. Shaykh Muhammad Salih Uthaymeen was asked what is the ruling of picture taken for things that have souls in it through a video camera. He responds الجواب إذا كان لحاجة أو مصلحة فلا بأس. So even his opinion after on this one is restricted. He says if it is for a need or a benefit, then it's okay. And then he says فالحاجة مثل أن يريد الإنسان إثبات واقع من الوقائع ويصورها بالفيديو. He said in a need, for example, a person wishes to affirm something that has occurred from a matter of realities. He wishes to record it with a video. والمصلحة مثل أن يصور أشياء مفيدا لأبناء بدلا عن التلفزيون. And he said, for example, a benefit is for him to take images of things that are beneficial for his sons instead of them having the television. And then he says لأن كثير من الناس صاروا يستعملون الفيديو فيصورون أشياء تلهي الصغار وتمنعهم من النظر إلى التلفزيون وما فيه من البلاء. And then he says, as for many of the people, they began to use video for things that distract the young ones and prevent them from looking at the television of what is found in there of evil affairs. Then he says أما لغير ذلك فإنها مضيعة للمال ومضيعة للوقت. He says as for other than that, then it's a waste of wealth and waste of time. مضيعة للمال لأن الأشرطة هذه لها قيمة ثم عرضها على الشاشة أيضا له قيمة تأخذ من الكهرباء. Then he says as for like these videotapes or these affairs from the video, it has some value to it. As well, placing it on the screen has as well some value. It takes from, even like with the affair of electricity and so forth. Then he said ثم إنها مضيعة للوقت أيضا. It's also a waste of time. وعلى هذا إذا كان في مصلحة دينية صار أمرا مطلوبا. And they say if it's the benefit of a religious affair, then it's something that is needed or requested. كما لو أردنا أن نصور محاضرا يحاضر في أمر شرعي يوجه الناس ويرشدهم هذا أمر طيب. He said that, for example, for us to record a person giving a lecture for that which is a legislated affair, where he guides the people and directs them, then this is a good matter. And this is from لقاء الباب المفتوح, the Fatawa, page 148. So this is one of his stages, just to show that it was restricted. It was restricted and it wasn't loose like this affair, like what people say. As well, he was asked ما حكم تصوير المحاضرات والندوات بأجهزة الفيديو. What's the ruling of recording lectures and conferences through videos that will be fine? He says الذي أرى أنه لا بأس بتصوير المحاضرات والندوات بالأجهزة الفيديو التلفزيونية إذا دعت الحاجة إلى ذلك أو اقتضته المصلحة لأمور. He says, I see that there's no harm in that, to record lectures and conferences with the video devices that will bring on the air or for television if there is a need for that, or there's a benefit that comes about by it. Then he says أولا أن التصوير الفوتوغرافي الفوري لا يدخل في مضاهاة خلق الله كما يظهر للمتأمل. He says, number one, photography that is instant for images that come out, it doesn't enter into the affair of resembling the creation of Allah, because we know from one of the reasons why picture taking was made haram is that it resembles the creation of Allah. And then he says, as it's been apparent for the one who really ponders over this, even though this affair has been disputed by the Shaykh, and we're going to clarify that, because some say that it brings out more ashaddu mudaha, it brings out more resemblance through these devices. What has more greater resemblance, with a hand or the actual device? So this is one thing that's been disputed, but we'll read it just to show the brothers that even this one, he says إذا دعت الحاجة, if there's a need for it. أن الصورة لا تظهر على الشريط, and he's mentioning this in relations to affairs of da'wah or benefit, just to show that those who are loose, when they go out of one of these stages and they ascribe, they're not really honestly academic in what they ascribe to the Shaykh. And then he says ثانيا أن الصورة لا تظهر على الشريط فلا يكون فيه اقتناء للصورة. And he says as well, the image, it doesn't become apparent on the actual tape. So he said it doesn't fall into the affair of possessing an image, because it comes a prohibition to possess images. ثالثا أن الخلاف في دخول التصوير الفوتوغرافي الفوري في مضاهاة خلق الله وإن كان يورث شبهة فإن الحاجة أو المصلحة المحققة لا تترك لخلاف. He says the difference of opinion whether photography falls into resembling the creation of Allah or not is, although it's a matter of doubt, he says وإن كان يورث شبهة, but he says the need or the benefit that is assured that's going to come out is not to be left off due to a khilaf. This is what he says. And this is referring to for a need or a benefit that you're sure of. لا تترك لخلاف لم يتبين فيه وجه المنع. That for a khilaf that has been made clear to you, the impermissibility of it. He says هذا ما أراه في هذه المسألة والله موفق. He said this is what I see in pertaining to this topic, and Allah is the source, or with him lies prosperity and success. This is from his مجموع الفتاوى مجلد الثاني باب التصوير, the second volume, chapter of taswir. As well, the Shaykh Muhammad bin Salih al-Uthaymeen, he went to another stage after that. So another stages, and we're going to clarify that. How do we know that these scholars went through these stages? Books have been written individually and collectively pertaining to the verdicts of our ulama and clarifying. For example, Muhammad bin Salih al-Uthaymeen, a few treatises have been compiled and from some of his students, and also some of them were mentioned specifically from his biography of some of his students writing regarding him. In particular, from his greatest of those who were his students as well, of his contemporary from his time, was Shaykh Abdurrahman al-Barrak. And we know him for his knowledge and so forth. He wrote an article called The Stance of Shaykh Muhammad Salih al-Uthaymeen regarding the affair of taswir, picture taking. And here he quotes this verdict that's found here that we're going to read. And these are from one of the few stages that of Shaykh Muhammad Salih al-Uthaymeen. He says, وَأَمَّا التصوير بالآلة وهي الكاميرا التي تنطبع الصورة بواسطتها من غير أن يكون للمصور فيها أثر بتخطيط الصورة وملامحها. He says, as for, this is the words of Shaykh Muhammad Salih al-Uthaymeen, as for taking images or producing images through a device like camera, he says, that which brings into an image through using this equipment, this device, without the person actually producing the image himself in specific by giving the specific features of the image. He says, فَهَذِهِ مَوْضِعْ خِلَافٍ بَيْنَ الْمُتَأَخِّرِينَ. This is a matter of difference of opinion between the later scholars. He goes, فَمِنْهُمْ مَنْ مَنَعَهَا. From amongst them is those who have forbade it. وَمِنْهُمْ مَنْ أَجَازَ. And amongst them those who have permitted it. He said, فَمَنْ نَظَرَ إِلَى لَفْظِ الْحَدِيثِ مَنَعَ. Whoever looks to the generality and the wording of the hadith, he'll prohibit it. كُلُّ مُصَوِّرْ فِي النَّارِ. Every picture taker is in the hellfire. And even the people, when they're asking these questions to the mashayikh, they themselves admit that this is taswir. They'll say to the shaykh, مَا حُكُمْ تَصْوِيرِ الْفِيديو. What is the ruling of taswir through a video? So they themselves affirm to the shaykh that this is an affair of taswir. And because of the general wording of the prohibition of the Prophet ﷺ without making exceptions, many have prohibited because of this. لأن التقاط الصورة بآلة داخل في التصوير. Because capturing an image through a device falls into taking pictures. ولولا عمل الإنسان بالآلة بالتحريك والترتيب والتحميض والصورة لم تلتقط الصورة. He said if it wasn't for the act of the human being with pressing the button and adjusting it and doing this and so forth, the image would not be captured. So then he says, وَمَنْ نَظَرَ الْمَعْنَى. And whoever looks to the meaning, And now look into the meaning. وَالْعِلَّ أَجَازَ, and whoever for why it was made prohibited, there then he will make it permissible. لأن العلة هي مضاهاة خلق الله. Shaykh Muhammad Salih Uthaymeen says here that specifically the main reason is that it's prohibited because it resembles the creation of Allah. والتقاط الصورة بالآلة ليس مضاهاة لخلق الله. And he says capturing the image through a device is not resembling the creation of Allah. He goes بل هو نقل للصورة التي خلقها الله تعالى نفسها فهو ناقل لخلق الله لا مضاه له. He said it's just merely transmitting the image, that which Allah has created. So he's transmitting something of the creation of Allah, not resembling in it. قال ويوضح ذلك أنه لو قلد شخص كتابة الشخص لكانت كتابة الثاني غير كتابة الأول بل هي مشابهة لها ولو نقل كتابته بصورة الفوتوغرافية لكانت الصورة هي كتابة الأول. So here he says, if a person were to try to copy someone else's handwriting or drawing some image, then we would say he's resembling that person's image of what he drew. Then after that, he says, relating to if a person were to actually take a photograph with a camera of it, it'll be the exact image. So he said here, he's actually just transmitting the image through the device of taswir. That's what he said, بِنَقْلِ وَاسِطَ عَلَى التَّصْوِير. So he calls it taswir, but he's just saying he's transmitting it. And then he says after that, pay attention, وَالِاحْتِيَاطِ الْإِمْتِنَاعِ مِنْ ذَلِكَ. He says what is more cautious is to refrain from it. لِأَنَّهُ مِنَ الْمُتَشَابِهَاتِ, for really it's from the doubtful matters. And we know the ruling regarding mutashabihat. وَمَنِ اتَّقَى الشُّبُهَاتِ فَقَدْ اسْتَبْرَأَ لِدِينِهِ وَعِرْضِهِ. The hadith, the Prophet ﷺ said, whoever avoids doubtful matters has safeguarded his religion and his honor. لكن لو احتاج إلى ذلك لأغراض معينة. He said, however, if he were to need that for specific affairs, كإثبات الشخصية, to affirm his ID or his identity, فلا بأس به, then there's no harm in that. لأن الحاجة ترفع الشبهة. Already the need raises the shubha, the doubt therein, meaning removes the affair of us have to avoiding something due to doubt. لأن المفسدة لم تتحقق في المشتبه فكانت الحاجة رافعة لها. He says because of the harm hasn't been actually established and that which is doubtful. We know it's doubtful, but we're not so sure that the harm has been affirmed. So he said the need that comes about raises it. This is Majmu' Fatawa wa Rasail al-Shaykh Muhammad Salih Uthaymeen, the second volume, page 254. And this is as well from one of the stages of Shaykh Muhammad Salih Uthaymeen, that he addaha min al-mutashabihat. And he referred this affair later on from doubtful matters. At what is safer or is the person to be more cautious is to refrain from it. And here we're going to read Shaykh Muhammad or Shaykh Abdurrahman al-Barrak, his ta'liq, his commentary upon this affair. I'll read at the beginning of his treatise when he wrote. He started off by saying, فإن من يمعن النظر في أجوبة الشيخ محمد صالح العثيمين رحمه الله في التصوير والنظر إلى صور واقتنائها يلاحظ أن تصوره للواقع فيه تشوش أي إنه لم يتصور الواقع تصورا تاما. He goes, whoever ponders into the answers of Shaykh Muhammad Salih Uthaymeen concerning picture taking and the affair of looking at the images and taking possession of it, he will come to notice that how he comprehended the reality of it, there's some confusion regarding it, he said. Meaning, he said there's some confusion regarding it. He says, meaning, إِنَّهُ لَمْ يَتَصَوَّرَ الْوَاقِعَ تَصَوُّرًا تَامًا. He hasn't really comprehended the affair in full, the reality of what he's addressing. And he said, وَلِهَذَا وَقَعَ فِي كَلَامِي فِي هَذَا الْمَوْضُوعِ بَعْضُ الْأُمُورِ الَّتِي تُسْتَغْرَبْ بِمِثْلِهِ عَفَى اللَّهُ عَنْهُ. He said, for that reason, it occurred in his speech pertaining to this topic, some affairs that and you will find very strange coming from him. Shaykh Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and then he said, Afa Allahu an, may Allah pardon him. And this is one of his great students, also his contemporary, Shaykh Abdurrahman Nasir bin Nasir al-Barrak, who's known to be teaching for 50 to 60 years. From the most senior of ulama, who studied this affair. He's mentioned in this. Someone who knows what he's talking, because he's writing a treatise or an article regarding it. He says, ويمكن أن يتخذ منها أهل الأهواء والشهوات طريقا إلى ترويج ما يهوونه من برامج الإعلام المرئية والنشر أنواع الصور في الصحف والمجلات. وأهم ما لدينا من كلام الشيخ رحمه الله في هذا الموضوع أجوبته كما في مجموع الفتاوى له 12 من صفحة 311 إلى 327 إن شاء الله. طيب, here he says, where it's possible, because of his general stances, or in these phases that the Shaykh Muhammad Salih went through, some of the people desires could have taken this as a ladder to take whatever they want of desires to using any programs, video programs or anything of images, visual programs, and spreading and distributing images, whether it be in newspapers or magazines. All of this they use is what's mentioned of some of the general answers of Shaykh Muhammad Uthaymeen as a ladder to do what they did. And he says, what's important? What's our main concern from the speech of the Shaykh, from his Majmu' al-Fatawa, is from this page to that page. And then he mentioned the verdict that we read above. And he went on to say, and then he says, وَبِنَاء عَلَى مَا تَقَدَّمْ يتبين أنه لا يصح إطلاق نسبة القول بجواز التصوير بالكاميرا إلى الشيخ. He said, based upon this research and what's been mentioned, it is not correct to absolutely ascribe the permissibility, the opinion of permissibility for a camera, a video camera, a picture taken through camera, of the device of camera, to the Shaykh, he said. فإما أن يقال عنه في ذلك روايتان. Either you say he had two opinions, أو يقال إن قوله بالجواز لم يكن مطمئنا إليه وإن احتج له ببعض الشبهات العقلية. Or you can say his opinion about permissibility, it wasn't something that he was actually content with, even though he perhaps used the word shubuhat, doubts, intellectual proofs of doubts concerning this topic as proofs. فقد ذكر القولين وحجج الفريقين ومال في أغلب أجوبته إلى القول بالجواز. But verily he's mentioned opinions of both and the proofs both sides, and he inclined in most of his answers to the opinion of permissibility. So he's saying that either you say this or that. If you are going to come and say that you believe that the Shaykh actually believes that it's permissible, and you said you see that his answers, majority of answers, deem it permissible, be precise and say, I've seen that majority of his answers are inclining to permissibility. And even with that we research, that is not his majority, and even the ones that he permitted, is restricted. Then he said, وَقَدْ اشْتَهَرَ عنه القول بالجواز وأخذ بذلك كثير من طلاب العلم وغيرهم تقليدا. He says, became well known and renowned for that Shaykh Muhammad Salih Uthaymeen says that it's permissible. This is what has been spread. And many of the students, and other than them, took this opinion تقليدا, blind following. كما تعلق به أصحاب الأهواء الذين لا يأخذون من أهل العلم إلا ما يوافق أهواءهم فعمت البلوى بهذا التصوير. And it's like similarly, the people of desires will only take from the scholars what coincides with their desires. And they didn't take the restrictions, or they didn't take any other affairs. They just took what they found of fatwa from Shaykh Muhammad Uthaymeen, whether it's older fatwa or not, and they ran with it. And he said it's become widespread, the affair of picture taking. وَاسْتَبَاحَهُ أَكْثَرُ النَّاسِ جَهْلًا وَتَقْلِيدًا وَهَوًى. And majority of the people have made it permissible out of ignorance, blind following, and with desires, he says. Meaning some of them this and some of them that. وَهَذَا كُلُّهُ لَا يَضُرُّ الشيخ. He said all of this does not harm the Shaykh. فَهُوَ عَلَّامَ مُجْتَهِد مُتَحَرٍ لِلْحَقِّ. He's a great, knowledgeable alim, mujtahid, striving for the truth. Even in some of the people who debated with Shaykh Muhammad Salih Uthaymeen, there's a tape called Tawjihat Talib al-Ilm. One of the students was debating with Shaykh Muhammad Salih Uthaymeen concerning his stance. And then it's on side A of this tape. He says, the Shaykh, he goes on to say, whoever uses my name, say to them, Uthaymeen laysa bin Nabi. Whoever uses my name pertaining to this topic, say that Muhammad bin Salih Uthaymeen is not a prophet. And he does not permit anyone to use his name concerning this topic. It's upon us all to strive to the truth. فَأَمْرُهُ دَائِرٌ بَيْنَ الْأَجْرِ وَالْأَجْرَيْنِ inshallah. He says his affair is between a reward, one reward, or two rewards, inshallah. And then he says, فَإِنَّ الْمُجْتَهِدْ إِنْ أَصَابَ فَلَهُ أَجْرَانِ وَإِنْ أَخْطَأَ فَلَهُ أَجْرٌ وَاحِدٌ. The one who's doing ijtihad, if he's correct, he gets two rewards. If he's wrong, makes a mistake, he gets one reward. And then he says, وَالْمُقَلِّدُونَ لِلشَّيْخِ لَمْ يُمْعِنُوا النَّظَرْ فِي سَائِرِ أَجْوِبَتِهِ لذلك لم يعرفوا حقيقة مذهبه في هذه المسألة. And those who are blind following the Shaykh did not actually contemplate and the different answers of Shaykh Muhammad Salih Uthaymeen. For that reason, they did not know his actual stance pertaining to this topic. SubhanAllah. Many of the people, he's saying this. And then he says, وَأَمَّا أَصْحَابُ الْأَهْوَاءِ فَلَا يُعِينُهُمْ التَّحَقُّقْ مِنْ مَذْهَبِ الْعَالِمِ وَفَتْوَاهُ. He says, as for the people of desires, it doesn't concern them to confirm the stance of an alim or what specific verdict did he give, was it restricted or not. بل يكفيهم أن يظفروا منه بما يوافق مرادهم. He says, what suffices them is to seize from the scholar what coincides with what they intended of desires. ويصلح لتشبث به لترويح باطلهم. Whatever they can snatch upon to relax themselves upon their falsehood. Well, we find that some people now, they record women modestly not so modest dressed in a state of weddings and so forth, and then you ask them why you're doing so, he tells you Muhammad Salih Uthaymeen. SubhanAllah. This is what we're seeing. People just going to so loose with this topic. Women displaying themselves in a state of beautification online, on their Snapchats and Instagrams. And then when you ask them, they tell you Shaykh Muhammad Salih Uthaymeen. So this is something to pay attention to. وفي كلام العلماء ما يعد من المتشابه الذي يجب رده إلى الواضح من كلامهم. He said in the speech of the ulama, sometimes, he said here, it could be counted from something that is not so clear. That you have to return it to that which is clear from his speech. So meaning the Shaykh, he has other speech that clarifies what he intended. وَسَبِيلْ أَهْلِ الزَّيْغِ اتِّبَاعِ الْمُتَشَابِهِ مِنْ كُلِّ كَلَامٍ. And the people of deviation is to follow whatever is so not clear. Then he mentioned the ayah, كَمَا قَالَ تَعَالَى فَأَمَّا الَّذِينَ فِي قُلُوبِهِمْ زَيْغٌ فَيَتَّبِعُونَ مَا تَشَابَهَ مِنْهُ. And those are people who have some deviation in their hearts, they follow that which is not so clear. Even in the fatwa of the ulama, they follow that which is not so clear of the alim just because they coincide what they wanted. And he says, وَهَذَا مَنْشَأَ ضَلَالٍ فِرْقَ الضَّلَالِ مِنْ هَذِهِ الْأُمَّةِ فَنَعُوذَ بِاللَّهِ مِنْ سَبِيلِ الْغَيِّ وَضَلَالٍ. He said this is the cause of the misguidance for many of the sects of this ummah, that they don't want to confirm or investigate a particular stance of an alim. They just follow whatever coincides with their desires. Then after that, the Shaykh mentions various groups of people concerning this topic. So I'll give you one group that he mentioned. We'll bring back again at the end of this discussion, time if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala permits. He says about some people of the desires, he says, مُتَّبِعُونَ لِأَهْوَائِهِمْ لَا يَعْنِيهِمْ أَنْ يَكُونَ التَّصْوِيرُ حَرَامًا أَوْ حَلَالًا. Some people who are in regards to the affair of picture taking, it doesn't concern them if picture taking is haram or halal. He's just going to find whatever of doubts or khilaf, of difference of opinion, to use it as a way to shun anyone that goes against them. SubhanAllah. So brother, why are you doing this? The ulama have said, or this khilaf. It doesn't really concern them if it's halal or haram. Wallah, and then he says, وَاللَّهُ يَعْلَمْ مَا يُسِرُّونَ وَمَا يُعْلِنُونَ. He says, Allah knows what they conceal and what they may make public. And then he mentioned also the various groups. Some people, they're actually looking for the truth, and other people are doing ijtihad. He said, "Hum darajatun inda Allah, wallahu basirun bima ya'lamun." The people are various types, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is all seer and all aware of what they do. طيب, I'm going to give, as we're going to conclude soon with the few stages of Shaykh Muhammad Salih al-Uthaymeen. He went through a few stages. One of the stages is a man sent a letter of advice to Shaykh Muhammad Salih al-Uthaymeen about this topic. And he started by saying, advising the Shaykh about his stance pertaining to this topic. And this letter of advice is found in a treatise called الإبراز في حكم ظهور العلماء على شاشة التلفاز. The last part of it, in that booklet. So Shaykh Muhammad Salih al-Uthaymeen replies to this letter. من محمد صالح العثيمين إلى أخيه المكرم شيخ so and so. Says Muhammad Salih al-Uthaymeen to Shaykh so and so who sent him the letter. حفظه الله تعالى وجعله من عباده الصالحين وأوليائه المؤمنين المتقين وحزبه المفلحين آمين. Then he says, وبعد فقد وصلني كتابكم الذي تضمن السلام والنصيحة. Has reached me your book, that which contains sending salams and advice. And then he says, so he replies the salams, they make dua. And then he says, your advice, I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to benefit me with it. And then he says, ولا ريب أن الطريقة التي سلكتموها في النصيحة هي الطريقة المثلى للتناصح بين الأخوين فإن الإنسان محل الخطأ. He says, well, the way the method that you've taken, the approach of advising, this is the best way of advising what happens between brothers. For really a human is open for errors. It's prone to make mistakes. And then he mentioned the affair of the brothers for one another, those who wish to come back to it. Then after that, he said, your advice has reached to me had a huge impact. And then he said after that, وما أشرتم إليه حفظكم الله من تكرر جوابي على إباحة الصور المأخوذة بالآلة فإني أفيد أخي أنني لم أبح اتخاذ الصورة والمراد صورة ما فيه روح من إنسان أو غيره إلا ما دعت الضرورة والحاجة إليك التابعة. He clarifies that what you mentioned that regarding me, that I permitted pictures through devices. He says, I do not permit that. And I only see of that which is a picture of a soul, that which is a dhurur or haja, a need. And then he gives a need, such as tabi'iyya, I believe that's like the affair of rukhsa, license and so forth. And he said, وإثبات الحقائق ونحوها, and affirming affairs of reality and its likes. Then he says, as for اتخاذ الصورة للتعظيم أو لذكرى أو للتمتع بنظر إليها أو التلذذ بها فإني لا أبيح ذلك سواء كان تمثالا أو رقما وسواء كان مرقوما باليد أو بالآلة لعموم قول النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم لا تدخل الملائكة بيتا في صورة. Then after that he mentions anything besides that, to have an image to immense it, or for memories, or for enjoyment to look at it, or these things that people do of looking at images or having them just for joyful moments. He says, I do not permit that. Whether it's a sculpture or whether it's something stitched on something or attached or that which is carved by hand or by Allah, he says, a device. He said, because of the hadith, the malaika will not enter a home that there's an image in it. And he says, وَمَا زِلْتُ أُفْتِي بِذَلِكَ وَآمُرْ مَنْ عِنْدُهُ سُورَ لِذِكْرَى بِإِتْلَافِهَا. And I do not cease to hold this opinion, and I command those who have images for memorial purposes to destroy it. And وَأُشَدِّدْ كَثِيرًا إِذَا كَانَتِ الصُّورَةُ سُورَةَ مَيِّتٍ. And he says, I stress even more importance that if the image is for image of someone that has passed away, the deceased. This is from Majmu' Fatawa, Volume 2, page 208 or 287 to 288. So these are from one of his last stages. Now we're going to mention the final stance of Shaykh Muhammad Salih al-Uthaymeen. It's found in the book الدر الثمين في ترجمة الفقيه الأمة العلامة بن عثيمين. In the biography of Shaykh Muhammad Salih al-Uthaymeen, written by one of his students, he compiles, even he says here, جمع عداده تلميذه. It's printed by Dar al-Basira. After clarifying a lot of affairs of the Shaykh, he clarifies an incident that happened for Shaykh Muhammad Salih al-Uthaymeen when he visited the Jami' al-Islamiyah. And we know Shaykh Muhammad Salih al-Uthaymeen, he visited Jami' al-Islamiyah a later part in his life, University of Medina. So he says, أن الشيخ كان سيحاضر في الجامعة الإسلامية بالمدينة المنورة وكان يوجد بالقاعة الكبرى عدد من كاميرات التصوير بالفيديو. He says that the Shaykh was going to give a lecture in Jami' Islamiyah in Medina, and it was found in the hall a number of video cameras. فقام الشيخ قبل صعوده. The Shaykh, before arising to give his talk, his muhadara, he passed by the people who had the cameras, and he put it down with his hand, بنفسه واحدا بواحدة, to the person. ثم صعد, then he went upon the stage to give his talk. And before the muhadara, he says, إنني لا أسمح لأحد بتصويري. I do not allow anyone to take a picture of me. And then he said, ومن صورني فأنا خصمه يوم القيامة. ثم بدأ في المحاضرة. And he said, whoever takes a picture of me, I'm going to be his opponent on the day of judgment. Then he continues his muhadara. And then here, the person, he comments. He says, فليسمع هذا كل من لا يفقه قول الشيخ. يعني, let anyone who hear this from the Shaykh, who doesn't know the opinion of the Shaykh regarding these affairs of photography and so forth. He says, وقد نسب إلى الشيخ في هذا الأمر شنائع من جراء الفهم المغلوط لفتوى الشيخ. وقد نسب, many things have been ascribed to the Shaykh of harmful matters due to their weak understanding or erroneous understanding for the fatwa of the Shaykh. And he says, وقد نوقش الشيخ كثيرا في هذا الأمر. Shaykh, many people have debated with him regarding stance. And these are one of the reasons why we see changes in his opinions and so forth. This is through research, an alim. That's why we find sometimes even Imam Ahmed and so forth, they may have a number of opinions when they travel or have debates. في أن عموم الأدلة تدل على منع أنواع الصور إلا ما استثنته الضرورة كما عليه فتوى شيخنا العلامة بن باز رحمه الله. He says, it was debated regarding the generality of prohibiting all types of images except that which is a darura, similar to what the fatwa, the verdict of our Shaykh, the Shaykh of our Shaykh, Shaykh Bin Baz rahimahumullah. So this was the last affair of Shaykh Muhammad Salih al-Uthaymeen, and we even heard from some of our Shaykh mentioning that Shaykh Muhammad Salih al-Uthaymeen, his later verdicts are different from his early ones. His later verdicts are different from his one, and whoever doesn't believe that can return to the fatwas himself and see the articles that has been written. As well, one of the brothers has written a detail, treatise called Dirasat Mawqif Muhammad Salih al-Uthaymeen fi Taswir, studying in detail the opinions of Shaykh Muhammad Salih al-Uthaymeen pertaining to this topic of Taswir. Tayyib, as well, from something that people do and they ascribe to Shaykh Muhammad Salih al-Uthaymeen, is that they go and they just videotape everybody without their consent. And then you ask them why they're doing that, they say, Shaykh Muhammad Salih al-Uthaymeen permitted. Shaykh Muhammad Salih al-Uthaymeen, he said, لا يجوز لإنسان أن يلتقط صورة أحد إلا بإذنه. It's not allowed for anyone to capture an image of anyone except with his permission. لو كان يعرف أن هذا الرجل يقول بجواز التقاط الصور. Even if this person knows, if you know from this person that he deems picture taking to be allowed, he's still not allowed to take his picture unless you know permissible. So the people that come and they just come and videotape a bunch of musallin, they don't know if he's allowed with it or not, and he goes around, he goes in different mosques, or he just records the audience and does this and that. Then later on you ask him why you're doing that, he says Shaykh Muhammad Salih al-Uthaymeen. So this is found in Sharh Bulugh al-Maram, volume 15, page 329. So this is what he mentioned. And there's other scholars as well who clarify this, that you're not allowed to just record people or take pictures of them, even if you know that they may even incline to the permissibility except with their consent. So imagine people that you know that are not okay with it. SubhanAllah. Even greater. Tayyib, brothers, bear with us. The next stance of the prominent scholar is Shaykh Muqbil rahimahullah fi Taswir. Shaykh Muqbil rahimahullah, we play it here is well known what's his stance, but we'll just play some of what he said concerning this topic. And the audio is not clear, but لا بأس.
لو قلنا لها من هذه صورة تقول هذه صورة فلان، من هذه صورة تقول هذه صورة فلان، وأنت تريد أن تجادل عن الباطل وأنت.
طيب, here the Shaykh Muqbil rahimahullah, and when he's speaking, he's asked about the topic of videos and cameras. He says, if you were to ask an old lady that's 70 years old, what is on the screen, she'll tell you it's an image. And now this is pictures, and this is the picture of so-and-so and so-and-so. So he's saying that we cannot deny the reality that this is picture taking. Even the people who, if people have any confusion, they can ask the people that design these devices. What do they say about it? فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. Ask the people who know of their profession. If you ask a media production specialist, he'll tell you that these devices, instead of having one single image, it has a number of images in frames, and some of them an actual strings of numbers where it's preserved. So you're producing images through these devices. So they themselves will tell you that this is picture taking. Even when it's written on the box and so forth, that you can take a number of pictures through this camera and these devices. So us coming and changing the fact and just saying it's not, we're changing the reality of even these people who brought these devices into existence. So you find that some people, they say that these devices are a shadow being confined. The person's shadow being confined, or light, a sensitive light going, and that shadow of reflection or so forth is being confined. So the Shaykh, he mentioned that these people, some of them, they say the only thing that's haram is sculptures or carved stones of what in the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And this is what he's saying, that is incorrect. But verily we're going to see that whether it is something that is captured of a shadow or not, this is all in reference in the linguistic angle of it and the customs of the people, and also technically as tasweer, taking pictures. So whether you go from the angle of lugha or the angle of the urf, you ask any of the customs of the people, what is this? They'll tell you picture taking. You're making pictures. And no one's going to just tell you that you're just photocopying or this. You're actually making a picture. Then after that, he mentions the proofs to show the generality of prohibition of images, and is not confined to what these people have mentioned that he's referring to. طيب, next prominent scholar is Shaykh Bin Baz rahimahullah. His stance pertaining to the topic of tasweer. Shaykh Bin Baz rahimahullah, from my research of different verdicts, even going back to the 80s and also to the early 90s and some of them late 90s, of his verdicts, they differ, some of them. Shaykh Bin Baz, first he came with the stance of absolute prohibition. And you can see that from his introductions and his preface to some of the books of different scholars. He gives an introduction mentioning that is extremely prohibited. And then after that, the Shaykh, he went through a stage where it was called tawaqquf. He went to a stage where he refrained from holding a stance, not saying it's haram or not saying it's permissible. And we're going to read here one of the fatawas that clarify that. He said: ما حكم تصوير المحاضرات بجهاز الفيديو لاستفادة منها في أماكن أخرى لتعم الفائدة? What's the ruling of taking pictures or recording muhadarats through a video to benefit from it in other places, so the benefit can be more general? He responds by saying, هذا محل نظر. This is something that is still being looked at. وتسجيلها بالأشرطة أمر مطلوب. And recording it with like audio tapes is something that is requested. ولا يحتاج معها إلى صورة, and it's not needed to have an image of it. ولكن الصورة قد يحتاج إليها بعض الأحيان حتى يعرف ويتحقق أن المتكلم فلان. Sometimes it may be needed to have the image just to confirm that so-and-so is the speaker. فالصورة توضح المتكلم, it clarifies who's the speaker. وقد يكون ذلك لأسباب أخرى, and also other reasons. فأنا عندي في هذا التوقف. I have, concerning this, توقف. I refrain from having an opinion, permitting or not allowing it. This is one of the stages that Shaykh Bin Baz went through. من أجل ما ورد من الحديث في حكم التصوير لذوات الأرواح وشدة الوعيد في ذلك. Being because of this, a number of ahadith. We know like there's 18 ahadith explicit prohibiting taswir. And there's other hadith that even imply there are more showing the threat of it. وإن كان جماعة من إخوان أهل العلم. And one of the reasons why the scholars are so sensitive about this issue and cautious, and they're not so loose, this is a topic that is found even in Kitab al-Tawheed. There's a chapter, باب ما جاء في المصورين, the chapter what has come concerning the picture takers. And it's an issue that it requires you to be sensitive about and be cautious and not just to be loose, find out what is correct. But really a lot of those scholars, when they explain Kitab al-Tawheed in that chapter, they mention the affairs of videos, many of them, Shaykh Bin Baz and others. So وإن كان جماعة من إخوان أهل العلم, I believe also Shaykh Bin Baz mentioned the topic of videos in that chapter of Kitab al-Tawheed. وإن كان جماعة من إخواني أهل العلم رأوا أنه لا بأس بذلك لمصلحة العامة. Even though some of my fellow brothers from people of knowledge seen that there is no harm in that due to the greater benefit and for da'wah. ولكن أنا عندي بعض التوقف في مثل هذا لعظم الخطر في التصوير. However, he says, myself, I have some sort of holding back concerning this due to the severity of the threat pertaining to picture taking. ولما جاء فيه من الحديث الثابت في الصحيحين وغيرهما في بيان أن شد الناس عذاب يوم القيامة المصورين. To clarify that the majority of or the hadith that come regarding that, the most severe sin punishment on the day of judgment is the picture takers, and also the hadith about cursing them. And he said other than that from a hadith. So this is from his Majmu' al-Fatawa, volume 5, page 355. So that is one of his stances. His another stance that the Shaykh was asked on Nur al-Darb, where he began to hold the opinion that for the greater benefit of giving da'wah and the harm of images and taswir, he sees it to be less. For the sake of da'wah purposes, he permitted it. He said للمصلحة الراجحة, for the greater benefit. And that's found Nur al-Darb, and that's found on their website. You can return to that question. As well, from what he took as well from his later stances, is where he made some sort of exception. He made some sort of exception of that. Like a person asked him, what عمت البلوى بالتصوير في الفيديو والسينما وما أشبه ذلك. He said it's become widespread, videos and cinema and other than that. So what is your advice, your direction concerning what has been widespread? He said لا شك أنها عمت البلوى بهذا. He said no doubt it's become widespread. ولكن عموم البلوى لا تجعل الشيء مباحا وهو محرم. He said it becoming widespread amongst the people doesn't make it halal. وقد عمت البلوى أيضا بشرب الخمر. Khamr has become widespread, it doesn't make it halal. والزنا, and also in many places he says والدول كثيرة فلا يجوز أن يقال هذا عذر بل واجب الحذر مما حرمه الله وإن كثر فاعله. You cannot use that as an excuse, but it's upon us all to be cautious from what Allah has prohibited, even if many people do it. And then he goes on to say, وكثير من إخواننا من أهل العلم قالوا أنه لا مانع من التصوير للقيام بالأحاديث الدينية في التلفاز وفي الفيديو إذا دعت الحاجة إلى ذلك. So many of my fellow brothers and people of knowledge said there is no harm or no prevention to carry out tasweer of going on television or for videos for religious purposes of sharing a hadith if there's a need for it. Pay attention to the word. If there is a need for it. وقالوا إن هذا من باب ارتكاب أدنى المفسدتين لتفويت كبراهما. And he said this is from taking the lesser of two evils. And then he says وأن جعل التلفاز والفيديو يخلو من نصائح العلماء. And to make television and videos not to be free from having the advice of the ulama. Meaning if the ulama are not found on there, the people are going to become misguided. So seeing from that angle, if they don't come and appear, then the people will become misguided. وأحاديث العلماء يجعل ذلك فرصة لغيرهم مما يتكلم في هذه الأمور ويدعو إلى الباطل. And the ulama coming with their speech, and there is an opportunity for other than for other than them, of those who may call to falsehood and burden themselves with pretending to be scholars. ويستنكر عن الحق وهذا الذي قاله له وجه وقد فعل بعضهم ذلك وظهر في التلفاز لنصيحة المسلمين والإجابة على أسئلتهم. وهكذا في التصوير الفيديو في الندوات العلمية أو المحاضرات العلمية لإرى الناس الشخص الذي يلقى المحاضرة. And he says some of the scholars have done this with this type of restriction to advise the Muslims and to answer their questions, even for videos and for conferences and muhadarat, so the people as well can see who's giving the lecture. For really, to al-ashkhas الذين قاموا بالندوة ليطمئنوا على أنهم فلان وفلان, just so the people can be certain that it was so and so and so to give you the talk. ويتيقنوا أن هذه الندوة صدرت منهم. So people can be assured that this occurred from so and so by seeing his image. And then he says, because sometimes it can be confusing and you may not hear the person's voice, so for that reason. And then he says وهو شرط أن يكون ذلك في مصلحة المسلمين ونشر العلم وحفظ الأمن وغيرها مما يكون في مصلحة عامة المسلمين هذا قوله وجه. He said with the condition that there's a benefit for the Muslims and distributing knowledge and security for safety. And other than that, from the greater benefit for all the Muslims. He said this opinion has a point of view. He goes, and then he says وأنا لم أفعل ذلك إلا في أوقات تعم البلوى فيها في بعض المجالس. Sometimes we see that there's rare videos to find Shaykh Bin Baz. Rare videos. Here he clarifies, he says, I did not do that, can he come on videos, except in timings where it was overwhelming. In some gatherings, public gatherings, where there is conferences or muhadarat public, فقد تصور أنا وأنا من فقد تصور وأنا من جملة الحاضرين. While there's videotaping happening, and I'll be amongst the people there, while I will not be harsh about it, looking to the greater benefit, he says. من نظر لمصلحة العامة التي قد ينفع الله بها المسلمين. So you find some of the scholars, even though they don't see this, but if they're in a gathering that this is happening, some of them may do this, not to remove the harm of the whole lecture and the whole program. So they remain as long as their opinion is known. So he goes, أما أنا أصور وأنا وحدي في حديثي في التلفاز. He goes, as for me, to be to have an image of me, or to be have tasweer of me, to be taking a picture of me while I'm alone, for a talk that I'm giving on television, or when I'm traveling. He says, up until now, I did not come to this opinion. And for him to just initiate it by himself, or to just, he's given a lecture by himself, and he wants to be videotaped. He goes, وعندي توقف في ذلك عندي بعض التوقف في ذلك. He goes, I have some type of holding back concerning that. I have some holding back concerning that. And the Shaykh is not just absolute regarding it. وأما إخواني الذين أقدموا ورضوا بأن يصوروا لهذا المعنى الذي تقدم فارجوا أن يكونوا موفقين وأنهم معذورون لقصدهم الطيب وحرصهم على نفع المسلمين والله ولي التوفيق. Then he says, as for my fellow brothers who did this and they're happy to be okay to be recorded or to be taken picture of for this meeting. Then he said, I hope that they've been granted success and that they've been excused for their good intention and for them striving to benefit the Muslims. And Allah is the provider of tawfiq. And this is from his website, Shaykh Bin Baz, rahimahullah. So this is just to show you the stance of Shaykh Bin Baz. As well, some of his students that were close to him, like some of his students that accompanied Shaykh Bin Baz for a number of years, like Shaykh Abdul Aziz al-Rajihi. He clarified, he was asked about the topic of Shaykh Bin Baz, about the fear of video. He said, someone asked him, يتردد في أوساط الناس أن سماحة الشيخ عبد العزيز بن باز رحمه الله كان يفتي بجواز تصوير الفيديو وبما أنكم حفظكم الله كنتم من الملازمين لسماحته. Many people, they spread that Shaykh Bin Baz permits تصوير of video, videotaping. And he said, being that you are those who used to adhere to him and know his opinions, can you clarify this topic with full clarity? So he goes, أما بعد فإني لا أعلم أن سماحة الشيخ عبد العزيز بن باز يفتي بجواز التصوير بالفيديو. He said, I do not know from Shaykh Bin Baz that he gives permission or permits تصوير video picture taking. وإنما الذي أعلمه أنه يفتي بمنع التصوير مطلقا إلا لضرورة. What I know from him is that he prohibits تصوير absolutely except for ضرورة. كالتصوير لبطاقة الأحوال أو جواز السفر أو لرخصة قيادة السيارة أو للشهادة العلمية. For something that are legitimate reasons such as passport and so forth and these type of affairs. And then this is taken from the book إبراز الأقوال العلماء في حكم التلفاز. As well, this is taken before from the website of Shaykh Abdul Aziz al-Rajihi. As well, we asked Shaykh Abdul Aziz al-Rajihi and our telelink with him, what is the stance of Shaykh Bin Baz, and it's available online or our telelink. We asked him about what is the stance of Shaykh Bin Baz concerning tasweer al-video. He said, return back to his fatwas. His fatwas are available. And he said, from what we know is that he doesn't give tafsir. He doesn't come with a compound answer, permitting it as some do. So many of the people from his students and those who were contemporary to his time, like Sheikh Zayd Madkhali, says that Shaykh Bin Baz was those who held the opinion that is absolutely prohibited. So this is Sheikh Zayd Madkhali, and as well as the found on our website, we translate it. So when you look at the affair, and as well other fatwas, like there's another fatwa for Shaykh Bin Baz. He was asked, ما حكم التغسيل والتكفين عن طريق الفيديو? What's the ruling of doing ghusl of the mayyit and shrouding him through videos? He said, التعليم يكون بغير الفيديو لما في الأحاديث الكثيرة الصحيحة من النهي عن التصوير ولعن المصورين. He was asked in a tape called أسئلة الجمعية الخيرية بالشقراء, can we do it with video, a recording? He says التعليم should be, with teaching the people should be without videos because of the hadith al-kathira that prohibits taking pictures and cursing them. As well, he was asked, does the television, does it enter into the affair of taking pictures, initiating and bringing all these images? He responds by saying, كل التصوير محرم. Every tasweer is haram. And this is the answer. And this is from another source as well. So when you look, you come to see that Shaykh Bin Baz, his fatwa is a bit different from what people are ascribing to him. As well, he has a fatwa in his tape called تحذير من الفتن. He says, وأما تساهل الناس اليوم بالتصوير فقد ملأوا الدنيا بالتصوير وهذا التساهل لا وجه له وهو يدل على قلة المبالاة وعلى ضعف الدين ممن تعاطاه والله مستعان. He says, for people today being lenient towards the issue of picture taking, they have filled the whole world with pictures. And this leniency has no basis to it. And it shows the lack of concern and weakness of the deen of those who do so. Wallahu musta'an. This is Shaykh Bin Baz. If you were to see, Allah alam now, what people do, who come online, they videotape young women that are dressed in modest, and all of that under the claim they're doing it for da'wah, or they just come online and they just all find themselves just laughing and making comedy, and then they say, oh, this is da'wah, we're following the opinion of Shaykh Bin Baz, and so on. So this is greater harm we've seen to what has transpired of people, what they do online, and then they ascribe back to Shaykh Bin Baz. As well, something to show the opinion of Shaykh Bin Baz is when Lajmat al-Da'ima, because Lajmat al-Da'ima have a few verdicts, the permanent committee, they were asked يعني هل التصوير الذي تستخدم فيه كاميرا الفيديو يقع حكمه تحت التصوير الفوتوغرافي? Is the videotaping that occurs through the camera, does it take the same ruling of photography? They responded لجنة الدائمة نعم حكمه أو حكم التصوير بالفيديو حكم التصوير الفوتوغرافي بالمنع والتحريم لعموم الأدلة. It takes the same ruling of video and photography are the same prohibition due to the generality of the proofs. And from those who are these are later fatwas, some of them are older than others, some of them from 1994, and some of them are after, some of them are before. But some of them, if you look at the dates, you can really see that it differs. And when you follow them up, you can see that it's not absolute like what people ascribe to Lajmat al-Daima. So those from the people that were who answered this was Abdul Aziz al-Sheikh, Sheikh Salih Fawzan, Abdullah Ghudayan, Shaykh Bin Baz, Abdul Razak al-Afifi, Bakr, Abu Zayd. And these are what they said. Also, Lajmat al-Daima has another fatwa, with clarifying that as well. So a person really studies this, he'll see. But really, there was an incident. One time, Lajmat al-Daima, they were hosting and doing a broadcast with a video, and one of the mashayikh was there who didn't see this, so he advised them. And from that time, that advice was said on there, it was written from the book Ibraz, that we quoted, that many of those scholars, they inclined to that advice. So there's a lot of signs showing that. And even if you see from Shaykh Salih al-Fawzan, and Shaykh Salih al-Fawzan, when he was asked, we'll play the audio, inshallah.
الذي يصور المحاضرات والدروس العلمية يدخل في الحديث فيكون كسر. نعم يدخل في هذا. لا حاجة إلى التصوير. المحاضرات العلمية تسجل تسمع تكتب المقصود حاصل بدون التصوير. نعم.
So he was asked, Shaykh Salih Fawzan, what takes place of people using the videos to record lectures and durus? Does this enter into the curse of the hadith of the picture taker being cursed? He said yes. He said there's no need. People can just write the benefits, listen to the tape, record the audio. As well, he was asked, the Shaykh Salih Fawzan,
فضيلة الشيخ وفقكم الله البعض يقول إن علة النهي عن التصوير هو أو هي عبادة تلك الصور والتماثيل أما اليوم فقد انتفت العلة فلذلك يجوز التصوير فما الجواب عن ذلك؟ من اللي نفى العلة هذه؟ العلة باقية إلى أن تقوم الساعة.
So some people, they asked the Shaykh that they said the reason for why picture taking of it being worshipped is no longer existent. They said who's going to worship these pictures? In that time they used to carve it, to worship it, but in our time it doesn't exist. He said, who says that it doesn't exist? Wallahi, we see one of the reasons why pictures were made haram, لشدة الافتتان بها. People are so obsessed to it. Wallahi, even some of these devices can display a person more than how he actually is. So a person could be so obsessed with an image. We see with the selfies. A person will just keep looking and recording and filming himself. People will spend so many much money, thousands of dollars, 1,000 or 2,000 or even more, for a phone that has a better camera, just so he can get an adjustment of how he looks on the image. And even it leads to what we find some of the mystical people who take these images and they incline, and even some of them do certain movements based upon it. So it has a strong effect. So here, also as well, Sheikh was asked, Shaykh Salih Fawzan, regarding this affair of we see you come on the broadcasting channel of Qanat al-Majd and other times of muhadarat, we see you coming on. Does this show that you're inclined to permissibility? He says, ليس هذا دليل على ما أرى. He says, it's not a proof that I see it. He goes, أنا ما أمرتهم. I did not tell him to do so. ولا طلبتهم. Nor did I request him to do so. And I've seen this. When I went to Dubai, the Sheikh just carries out his lecture, and even in the lecture himself, sometimes he'll say, tasweer is haram, avoid it. And he'll carry on with the lecture. And he says, وَإِنَّهُمْ هُمْ يَأْتُونَ أَخَذُوا صُورَةَ شيخ بن باز وهو يحرم هذا ويحرج من يفعله ويحرج من يفعله. They come and do this. They took the image of Shaykh Bin Baz while he sees it to be haram. And he makes it an issue of a burden, whoever upon whom does it. And then he said they'll take his image in public gatherings and on big occasions. And he said the sin is upon them. He said, as for me, he goes, فَلَا نَرُضَى بِهَذَا. We didn't tell them to do that, nor did they consult with us. This is from on his website. As well, Shaykh Salih Fawzan, he says, وَقَدْ كَثَرْ, and in his book, إرشاد إلى الصحيح الاعتقاد والرد على أهل الشرك والإلحاد, he says, وَقَدْ كَثَرَ في زماننا هذا التصوير واستعماله ونصب الصور بتعليقها والاحتفاظ بالصورة تذكارية وكثر أيضا. And he says, in this time, many pictures and images have increased, and the usage of it, and people displaying them and preserving them and holding them for memorials. He says, after speaking about another affair, he goes, وَذَلِكَ بِسَبَبِ غُرْبَةِ الدِّينِ. It's because the religion becomes strange. وَخَفَاءَ السُّنَن, and sunnahs many being forgotten. وَظُهُورِ الْبِدْعَ, and bid'ah innovations become more apparent. وسكوت كثير من العلماء واستسلامهم للأمر الواقع. This is something I want those to pay attention to. And he affirms that many of the scholars have become quiet about this affair. And then they have submitted to the modern day affair. He said, this is what he's saying. حتى أصبح المعروف منكرا, until what was good became munkar. If you say, no, I don't want to, they look at you as extreme. If you say, I just want to do a lecture for my voice, I say, why be extreme? والمنكر معروفا في غالب البلدان, and evil has become goodness in most of the lands. And he says, ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العظيم. This is the words of Shaykh Salih Fawzan. And we're going to mention some other affair. I don't know if we have time to mention the stance of Shaykh Abdul Muhsin Abbad. Shaykh Abdul Muhsin Abbad, after going through a number of his audios from his Sharh al-Sunan, Tirmidhi and Nasa'i, and the Q&A and different affairs, came to see that the Shaykh, his opinion is like Shaykh Salih Fawzan, that he sees it not permissible except in one state, which is for to be live without being recorded. Live on the air, he sees it permissible. And even with that, he's mayartah. He's not comfortable with it being live on the air. He prefers it not to be. So this is from the opinion of Shaykh, and you're going to see. But as for when he's asked about other people, he mentions what they hold.
أحسن الله إليك. حيث أن الدورة تنقل عبر القنوات والإنترنت فحصل فيها تصوير، وطلب الإخوة قد حصل كثير من الأسئلة يسألون عن هذا الموضوع. التصوير يسمونه المتحرك.
الناس أو المشايخ في هذا الزمان متفاوتون، منهم من كان يرى أن مثل ذلك لا ينبغي، ولكنه لما يحصل فيه من المنفعة العامة ويحصل فيه من الفائدة الكبيرة. بعض المشايخ رأوا أن هذه المفسدة أو هذه المضرة الجزئية مغمورة في جانب ذلك تلك الفوائد العامة أو المصلحة العامة أو المنفعة العامة التي تصل إلى كل مكان وتصل إلى مختلف الأمكنة. بعض أهل العلم كذلك، وبعضهم يرى أن في نفسه شيء من هذا، وكل على حسب ما اجتهد وأداه إليه اجتهاده ورأى أن يكون عليه.
So here, when he was asked about to make his talks and his lectures and classes upon video, he mentions that some scholars, they see this for the greater benefit, and that the harm is buried due to the great amount of benefit that comes. And he says that some ulama, they see that it's better to leave it off and safer. And who he's referring to himself, because we're going to hear an audio regarding this affair.
جاءت الأسئلة في أصحاب الصور. هل تدخل صور الفيديو والجوالات الصور الفوتوغرافية في هذا الوعيد؟ الصور التي ذوات الأرواح الحكم فيها واحد، وأما الصور التي ليست في ذوات الأرواح فهذه لا بأس بها مطلقا. الصور التي ليست في ذات روح.
So he's asked about phones and cameras and so forth, videotaping. He sees that if it's with those things of souls, it's not allowed. And then as well, he has asked as well.
هذا سؤال يقول فيه سائل
هل يعني يجوز التصوير بالفيديو للمصلحة، وذلك مثلا تصور حلقات علمية وندوات تسجل وتبث تكون محتفظ بها؟
بعض أهل العلم قال أن هذه يعني مفسدة مغمورة في جنب أي مصلحة كبيرة، ولكن يعني يستغني عن ذلك وحصل الإيصال الفائدة بغير هذه الطريقة، فلا شك أن السلامة أسلم.
So the Shaykh was asked about it again, about videos and cameras for muhadarat and lectures. He says that some of the scholars, they see this, but he says if this could be done without, and the benefit getting across without these type of affairs, he said, provided there's no doubt that a salama, being on the safe side, is the best of affairs. So this is the stance of Shaykh Bin Baz. I've heard some people have ascribed otherwise. As well, these are the stance of other great senior scholars, even before that. The Mufti, before Shaykh Bin Baz, Shaykh Muhammad Ibrahim al-Shaykh, Shinqiti, Yani Abdullah ibn Humayd, great scholars, Hamad al-Ansari, Shaykh Muhammad Aman al-Jami. These were their stance. It was in their time, videos and cameras were there, present. Shaykh Ahmad Najmi, Shaykh Zayd al-Madkhali. Even we're going to clarify that yani, the stance of the Mufti, Shaykh Abdul Aziz al-Shaykh, regarding this.
ما حكم التصوير بكاميرا الجوال بالنسبة لذوات الأرواح ما يجوز.
يعني the Shaykh Abdul Aziz al-Shaykh, the Mufti of Saudi Arabia at this moment, he was asked about yani, video or using a camera to take pictures of things that have souls. He says it's not permissible. And yes, he permitted it yani, and certain restrictions of what he may do or see, similar to what we mentioned before. But for anyone to ascribe like loosely of that the Shaykh sees it, then no, that's not correct. Even Shaykh Salih al-Luhaydan, his opinion, first he says, لا خير في التصوير. If you hear someone's audio, he says there's no goodness in taswir. And then even with that, if he permitted it for certain affairs, or he doesn't see it to be included, he makes certain restrictions. You can hear.
قد يصور من لا يحب أن تصوروه فيه وقد يصور النساء وقد
He said sometimes a person with all this affair could record, take pictures of people that they don't want to be taken a picture of. And he can even take pictures of nisa, women. This is what people do now. They take pictures of women and so forth, and they ascribe it back to these ulama. And here's a benefit from Shaykh Abdul Razak al-Badr, and then we're going to end with a few benefits.
وكثير من الناس ينخرط في أشياء كثيرة عندما يرى طلاب العلم انخرطوا فيها وتهاونوا فيها، فينبغي لطالب العلم أن يتجنب مثل هذه الأمور، أولا نصحا لنفسه، وأيضا حتى لا يكون قدوة للآخرين في مثل هذه الأمور التي جاء فيها مثل هذا الوعيد. ومن رخص من أهل العلم في هذه الصور لم يرخص فيها بهذا التوسع وبهذا الإسراف وما يسمى بالصور الذكرى ونحو ذلك، لم يرخص فيها بمثل هذه الطريقة، ولم يرخص فيها في مثل هذه الأعمال التي تصور الآن، يصور نفسه في المسجد وفي المناسك وفي الأعمال، هذا ما لم يرخص فيه أحد. ولهذا ينبغي على الإنسان أن يستعمل هذه الصور في حدود الضرورة، يستعملها في حدود الضرورة ويدع ما سوى ذلك. نعم.
Shaykh Abdul Razak al-Badr, he clarifies a good point that our student knowledge regarding this affair should be the best of example. And that's why you find some students' knowledge are very loose regarding this, and they've set a bad example for the awam. As well, he mentions that this affair, that you wouldn't find no one from the ulama, even those who permitted, have a permitted to what people are doing now, so with this loose behavior. Yani you wouldn't find that. And the affairs is obvious. And inshallah, in the second part, we'll have like about 10 more minutes, 5 more minutes. We'll do that after Salat. Concerning this topic, inshallah, we'll mention a few of fatawa. Start with this, inshallah. Barakallahu feekum. Continuing from where we left off, clarifying that in relation to understanding the views of the scholars is very important, especially pertaining to this topic that's so sensitive. There are a number of scholars that hold the stance that they should refrain, because of how sensitive this topic is, and there's so many ahadith, from even videos, cameras, whether it be for da'wah or not da'wah, from them in our time, that are of senior ulama, Shaykh Muhammad bin Adam al-Ethiopi, as well as many of those senior shuyukh that are in Mecca, Shaykh Abdurrahman Ajlan, and other scholars that we know from, they've been teaching for a number of years. They've been upon that opinion from that time till now, holding this affair. As well, I wanted to mention here a beautiful statement of our Shaykh Yahya ibn Ali al-Hajuri, Hafidhahullah, pertaining to this topic, because now the topic of videos and so forth, have somewhat of the people have become desensitized about it.
بلغ من غربة الدين على أنهم يأتون بأشياء كبائر ثم يجعلون عملها، الأدلة تدل بكل وضوح على أنها من كبائر الذنوب، ويجعلون فعلها من الخلافيات. فمسائل من الربا أدرجها بعض الناس في الخلافيات، والربا من كبائر الذنوب. وتصوير ذوات الأرواح أدخلوه في الخلافيات، وتصوير ذوات الأرواح من كبائر الذنوب. إن الذين يصنعون هذا الصور يعذبون، يقال لهم احيوا ما خلقتم. أشد الناس عذابا يوم القيامة المصورون. وفي حديث أبي جحيفة حرم الدم ولعن المصور.
So the Shaykh, may Allah preserve him, he goes on to clarify that this topic about the issue of picture taking, they have made many of the people, due to the strangeness of the religion, they have made picture taking videos or this about affair as if it's just a regular affair of khilafiyat. Yes, there's khilaf, but they just made it like if it's, you can just choose any opinion you want. While the issue is very sensitive, depending on which opinion you hold, one is from the kabair and one is not. So it's a very sensitive topic.
فهو فيه وعيد لعنة، وفيه وعيد أشد العذاب، وفيه عدة وعيدات، ثم يقول لك المسألة خلافية وبكل برودة، بكل هدوء نفس. هذه كبيرة من كبائر الذنوب. الوعيد المذكور فيها نظير الوعيد أشد من الوعيد على قتل النفس.
So the Shaykh said that you find people so easily they just say to you it's khilaf, without not feeling any sensitivity about it, without even looking into the matter, just easily from himself, he'll just say it's khilaf, so he can choose whatever opinion he wants. He says the threats that have come regarding picture taking are more severe than even the threats about the affair of qatl, murder, subhanAllah. And look at the threats that have come about it.
من قوله يعذبون يقال لهم احيوا ما خلقتم، معناه أنهم يعذبون باستمرار إلى أن يدارك الله، إلا يعني في الحديث خرج مخرج الوعيد. وهكذا يخرج عنق من النار له لسان ينطق وعينان يبصر بهما، يقول وكلت بكل جبار عنيد وبمن دعا مع الله إلها آخر وبالمصورين. الآن والله يا إخوان أن منكر صور ذوات الأرواح في بعض الأمكنة ربما يشعر بالغربة، وهذا من هنا ينتقده وهذا من هنا وهذا يعارضه وهذا. لماذا؟ قالوا هذا خلافية.
Now the Shaykh said we find a form of strangeness. If you were to try to criticize someone for picture taking, you will find strangeness of religion, like someone will criticize you, this one will call you extreme, this one will say that.
هذا والله من غربة الدين، أن الأشياء التي هي قد دلت الأدلة
الكثيرة على الزجر فيها واللعن فيها والوعيد الشديد فيها، بما مثله يكون من كبائر الذنوب بلا شك. وقد أدرجها في كبائر الذنوب الذهبي رحمه الله والهيثمي وغيره من الأئمة من ألف في الكبائر. ثم يأتي من يقول لك هذه خلافية.
Yeah, there's scholars that have written before in books of major sins, Imam Zahabi and others, that the issue of picture taking is from the major sins. It's from the major sins. And it's not easy just to say to someone that it's just a khilaf, you can choose whatever opinion you want.
كبائر الذنوب خلافية، هذا شيء محرم، ولكن حصلت فيه معصية لا يجوز التجرؤ عليها من أجل أن أحد قال بها أو فعل بها، وإلا شيء محرم، حرم كبيرة. إلا من ألزم بذلك فإنه في عافية من الله، يستغفر الله ويعفو وربك يعفو. فاتقوا الله ما استطعتم ولا ما استطعت ذلك. هذا نموذج من نماذج نسيان السنن أو تناسيها، ونسيان الخير أو تناسيه، وعدم المحافظة على النعمة. فلا نعمة أعظم على العباد من نعمة الإسلام وشريعة الإسلام.
So this is some of what's been mentioned by the Shaykh Yahya bin Ali al-Hajuri. He speaks about this affair. People have become so desensitized, and it's easily for them to just say the issue is khilaf without even looking into the matter. That's the sad part. And we'll share here quickly that some of the other senior scholars, and as well, has clarified. Here I'll play an audio clip for Shaykh Abdul al-Khudair. Shaykh Abdul al-Khudair, he speaks about this topic. We'll listen to it.
يقول: ما حكم التصوير حيث أننا نجد الكثير ممن توسع بذلك التصوير؟ جاءت النصوص الصحيحة بتحريمه والتشديد في أمره. هذا من حيث الإجمال، ولا أحد يشكك لا الذي يصور الآن ولا قبل الآن. تصوير حرام، لكن الخلاف في كون التصوير الموجود الآن تصوير تتناوله النصوص أو مجرد حكم ليس بتصوير. فالذين تساهلوا فيه لا سيما من أهل العلم الموثوقين، لأنه وجد الآن من علمائنا أهل العلم والعمل من يصور، يعني يصور، لا يصور بنفسه، يصور ولا ينكر على من صوره ويخرج في القنوات وهو معروف بعلمه وعمله وإخلاصه لا يشك فيه، لكنه ينازع في كون التصوير بهذه الآلات داخل في النصوص.
So Shaykh Abdul al-Khudair, also from the senior ulama and known for his knowledge, he mentions that he was asked about the affairs of tasweer, picture taking, if it's general and so forth. He said yes, it's general and that is haram. And he says yes, you may find from the ulama some of them that are lenient, that just come and appear, and even though themselves won't take a picture of them or other people will do so, and even they would dispute of it being included in the hadith of the threat.
وبعض المصحف يقول مستحيل أن يرتب هذا العذاب الشديد شد الناس عذابا يوم القيامة المصورون.
He says some of them even say it is mustahil, it's impossible. Those ahadiths that speak about that heavy threat, about the most severe torment on the day of judgment, is the picture taker is going to be applied to the affair like what people do now. He says this is impossible. This is what some people object with. And some people say, how could just pressing a button lead to that type of punishment? He said, this is what people are objecting to. He says, we don't see that far-fetched. If a person can say one word and fall to the lowest of the hellfire just for one word, imagine just pressing a button.
وضغطة زر من المسدس تقتل مؤمن خالد مخلد في النار.
He said the same thing. Pressing a button for a gun leads to a great crime, killing a person.
وإذا قال أنا ما صورت الآلة هي التي صورت قلنا أيضا ما قتل المسدس هو الذي قتل.
He said if a person says that if I didn't take a picture, the device took the picture, we're going to say, okay, what about the person who pressed the gun, the button, who shot? We're going to say the gun shot him or the person shot him.
فالمسألة في النزاع في هذا التصوير، وعهدنا من الناس في لا سيما في المسجد الحرام والمشاعر كاميرات تكسر، يعني بعلم من المسؤولين وبنظر، بل قد يتبناها بعضهم والآن يعتقدها بعض الناس عبادة.
He said we knew from time ago that in the time of the Haram, if people were to have these type of devices and so forth, it would be confiscated and destroyed. Now, some of the same people, or some people, they take it as a form of act of worship. So this Shaykh, he goes on to speak about this topic. Here's another audio where he's asked, Shaykh Abdul Karim al-Khudair.
الصور أنواع. الصور التي لها ظل يسمونها تماثيل، هذه مجمع على تحريمها ودخولها في النصوص، مجمع على ذلك.
So he says the pictures are various of types. The picture that has a shadow for it, like the sculptures, then this is something that the scholars unanimously agree upon, that is haram.
الصور التي لا ظل لها وهي منقوشة باليد هذه أيضا محرمة.
It says as the picture with like drawing that occurs, carving, or what happens with the hand, then he says this as well is haram.
لأن النبي عليه الصلاة والسلام رأى الصورة في القرام مجسم، صار في صورة، فتغيظ عليه الصلاة والسلام وقال إن الملائكة لا تدخل بيتا فيه كلب ولا صورة، فدخلت الصور غير مجسمة. يبقى النزاع الطويل في الصور التي من خلال الآلات وليس للعامل فيها إلا تحريك الآلة.
So he says the main dispute comes with these devices, where a person doesn't do so much, he's just pressing a button. This is where the main of the dispute came about.
يقول بعضهم أن هذه ليست من تصوير المصور، هذه من تصوير فعل الآلة، وهي أيضا ليست مضاءات لخلق الله، بل هي خلق الله، بل هي خلق الله. التكليف إذا اتجه إلى غير أهل للتكليف، يعني مثل التصوير. نعم.
So he's addressing what some of these people say, that these devices are the one that's carrying out these images, and it's not the person in reality. As well, they're saying that it doesn't resemble the creation of Allah. It's the actual creation of Allah. It's the actual creation of Allah. So this is what. So he's going to address this.
ليس بمكلف المباشر له اللي هو الآلة، والمتسبب مكلف. والقاعدة عند أهل العلم أنه إذا لم يكن المباشر لا يمكن تضمينه ولا يمكن مخاطبته لأنه غير مكلف، ينتقل الحكم إلى المتسبب.
So he says, when you're dealing with something that is not direct, the general rulings of fiqh, it applies to the things that were a cause of it, especially when you're talking about something that's like an object or doesn't have any taklif rulings and is not held responsible. So the one that the ruling applies to is the one that was a cause for it. So the ruling moves on to that.
يقولون أشد الناس عذابا مع ما ورد في ذلك ولعن المصور بسبب ضغطة زر يقول ما يمكن هذا ما يناسب هذا.
And they can't take it and accept it in their mind. This is what the Shaykh saying, that the fact that just pressing a button applies to them the hadith. The most severest in torment is the picture taking. He's saying they're saying that this is not reasonable here or suitable.
طيب الذي ضغط زر المسدس وقتل مسلم ها مو مثله ضغطة واحدة مثل ضغطة زر الجوال.
So he asked another Shaykh, what about the person who presses the button of a gun or a trigger? Isn't it similar? He said it's similar.
شلون يقتل بسبب ضغطة زر؟
لأنه هو المتسبب.
ها؟
لأنه هو المتسبب.
في حكم المباشر هنا.
He said, why is the one, the actual thing that was carried out was with the weapon, but the one that caused it and pressed the button, he's held responsible. He's perhaps killed for that person. Why? Because he takes the ruling of Mubashir, the one who directly was involved.
لأن المباشر الذي هو مسدس الذي قتل والمباشر الذي هو الجوال الذي صور لا يمكن توجيه الخطاب إليه فينتقل الحكم إلى المتسبب. في فرق بين زر المسدس وزر الجوال. هم يقولون ما يمكن تحمل النصوص الشديدة على من ضغط زر وطلع صورة. نظير هذا من ضغط زر المسدس وقتل مسلم. هل يستطيع أن يقول أحد الذي قتله مسدس أو دهسه بكفر السيارة يقول الله عندك ما الكفر.
If a person hits someone with the car and he pressed the gas, does the tires get held responsible or the person who pressed the gas?
على كل حال السلامة لا يعدلها شيء.
He said in all cases there's nothing equivalent to being on the safe side of things.
والبحث عن الرخص نعم عمت بها البلوى وتصور وانت ما تدري وترتب على هذا التصوير أمور وعظائم وطلق بسببها النساء كثير بل قتل نساء.
So he goes on to say that yes, people, they can find concessions. They can find someone that can give them a verdict that's permissible. And that it's widespread, and even people, certain things have caused even to divorce because of these images.
بل قتل النساء بسببه. لأن صورت على غرة منها في مناسبة أو في شيء وساوم عليها الخبيث المصور أو من وصلت إليه ووصلت إلى أبيها وإلى أخيها وإلى زوجها حصل الشر المستطير. لو واحد منكم وعبد الرحمن شوف لنا كلام طنطاوي جوهري عن حكم التصوير أظن في سورة الأنفال.
So now he's having an open discussion with the students to bring something out regarding one of the books.
تعيد متى شئت. إذا بصورة تحافظ بجوالك. على كل حال نبي نحشر على الناس ما تبعوا فيه علماء تبرأ الذمة بتقليدهم لكن كل إنسان يقرر على حسب ما يدين الله به.
He said, I'm not talking about someone that maybe perhaps blindfold a particular scholar or so forth, but we're just reminding that everyone is going to be held responsible of what he believes in to be correct or not, and what is to be following his religion.
من أهل العلم الذين تبرأ الذمة بتقليدهم قالوا بأن هذا مو بتصوير حبس ولي يقولون سواء أصابوا أو أخطأوا هم من أهل العلم. وين؟ شو يقول؟
يفرق ما بين الفوتوغرافي اللي يحتاج إلى تحميض والفور. يقول الفوتوغرافي
هو بكاميرا. فوتوغرافي بكاميرا.
يقول يباشر المصور تحميض بخلاف
هو الشيخ يمنع من الاحتفاظ بالصور ويمنع من تعليق الصور وصور الذكرى والصور كلها يحرمها الشيخ.
Here, then someone asked him about one of the aforementioned fatwas that we mentioned, Shaykh Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the old ones. So he clarifies that the Shaykh sees a lot of restrictions, that you can't do it for this and you can't do it for that, or you can't restore it, or can have it for memorial reasons. All of this he's clarifying pertaining to the fatwa.
على كل حال مسألة عامة تطمت والاحتياط في ذلك بغاية الصعوبة. يعني في المناسبات لا يستطيع أن يحتاط إلا أن لا يحضر.
He says this is something that has become widespread now. It's like a person, it's hard for him to even avoid. He goes somewhere for occasion, there's people recording, so forth. Like even you go to wherever, even Masjid al-Haram, so forth, anywhere, there's recording. I remember one time when I was doing tawaf, someone sent me a message of my image online. He said, "Yo, look, we see you doing tawaf." So it's something you can't avoid. And there's certain things, but what you could avoid is upon you too. He's going to clarify that.
واللي بيصور ويصوره في بيته ويصوره في درسه ويصور وش تجبر؟ إما أن تنقطع بالكلية أو تقول أنا والله ما رضيت والإثم على من رضي ودعه.
Yani, what are you going to do in this scenario? Are you going to not even come outside and say that people are going to film me or record me or not give classes? Or are you just going to say that I'm not pleased with this and the sin is upon those who did it?
الله المستعان. إيه يمنع. تعالى هذا يصوره بنفسه. يمنع.
He said if someone specifically comes to you to film you and so forth, then here you tell them no, you prevent that. But if the Sheikh's earlier was speaking about certain things that is hard to prevent.
على كل حال المنع الآن غير ممكن.
So in all cases now it's hard to even to say I completely avoid. Wherever you go, it's there. So the Sheikh's mentioning the situation now.
لأن عمت به البلوى وتواطأ عليه الناس وقلدوا فيه من قلدوا ويبقى المتحرج والمتأثم لا يتعرض للتصوير ولا يمكن أحد من تصويره وإن أمكنه من أراد أن يصوره فليفعل.
So he mentions that if this has become widespread, if a person is able to avoid it or prevent someone from doing it, then let him do so.
على حسب ما تعتقد وتدين الله به. مسألة خلافية أنت تصنع ما شئت لكن أنا من مصور ولا أرضى أصور. واللي عندي وأدين الله به أن ولعن المصور.
Someone asked him about the affair of picture taking or videos. He says, based upon what you believe, but he goes, yeah, Shaykh, is a difference of opinion. He goes, difference of opinion, but I'm not pleased with it, and I do not incline to it, and I see that the text about the curse applies for it.
شد الناس عذابا هل هي صورة ولا ما هي بصورة؟ ها؟ يسمونها صورة. طيب جاءني واحد من المشايخ وقال لي شيخك فلان صار يظهر بالتلفزيون.
So Shaykh asked a question, is this video image, is it an image or not? He says that people say from his image. He said, okay, one time one of the people came to me and said, and used against me, that one of your mashayikh have begun to appear on television.
مالك حجة ولا ما تطلع وهذا الله يهديك يقول لي هذا ليس بصورة أنا إذا طلعت بالتلفزيون وهذا مكثر بعد من الخروج في القنوات أنا إذا طلعت في التلفزيون ورأيتني قلت هذا فلان ولا صورة فلان.
So the Shaykh mentions that this is not proof. And he says if a person were to come up here on television, there's going to be asked, is it the image of so-and-so or is this the actual person himself? Huh?
تقول هذا فلان لكن إذا طفى الكهرباء وين يروح فلان.
So one person said, we're going to say that's actually him. So he said, okay, when the power turns off, what happens to so-and-so? Does he...
إذا طاح التلفزيون وانكسر وش يصير عليه صاحب كذا؟
ما يجي. ما يجي لأنه صورته.
So the Shaykh said, what happens if the television breaks or so forth? Anything happens to him? He said, no. Like one brother said, it's just an image, ya Shaykh.
هو صورته.
So it's an image, his image.
شوية.
Bear with us because this audio is very important. We'll just prolong with this.
الله المستعان. سربك الثبات.
He's mentioning that some people, the way they have permitted certain things is through intellectual approach now. And he responds by saying, Allahumma musta'an, ask your Lord for firmness.
وأنا أعرف إن من أهل ممن ينتسب إلى العلم يضحك علينا يسمع الكلام. لأن الأمور ما يتصور أو يتخيل أنها تبي تمنع أو بتنتهي. والله إني نسيت بعيد على أهل جدة لكن يبدو والله أعلم ولا أراكم كثيرا لفشلتم.
But here's another part I want to clarify with the Shaykh.
نفس الشيء.
صلى الله عليه وسلم. من يقول بتحريم التصوير لكنه يجيزه في الدعوة الحاجة لأنه لا يمكن الوصول للناس إلا من خلال التصوير في هذا العصر.
والله ما لا شك أن الأمور بمقاصدها لكن كما قال عمر فإن ما عند الله لا ينال بسخطه.
So a man asked him, Ya Shaykh, the affair of, tasweer, just for da'wah, for really it reaches to far places. He said, with no doubt, things are based upon his intentions, but the affair is like how Umar said, and whatever is with Allah, a reward, is not attained through his displeasure. SubhanAllah, powerful statement, remember that. So another thing too, we're going to quickly wrap, is just those who distinguish between photography and cameras or videos. The way how it originally started, it was a bunch of animation, traditional animation, was just people using actual photos and making them go fast. That's how it originally started. Then with the increase of these equipment, they were able to capture 24 to 30 images in just 1 second. SubhanAllah. And they put it into frames, small frames and so forth. So every camera was based upon frames and videos and so forth. So it becomes something that's moving. And this is what's happened, because you find that some of the shuyukh, they may make a difference between it. But when you reality look, you find that the affair is reality one, even the newer cameras and videos, that they use like a sensitive tiny light that emerges and it brings like strings of numbers, which is like data. And there then they mention that this is just like a transmission. But in reality, it's not like a transmission or like a mirror, they said. Because firstly, it has a dimension, and a mirror doesn't have a dimension. Secondly, this is something that will not happen unless the actual image is captured and generated. For that reason, it has an original where they can replicate and make copies and so forth. And once the transmission is over, it still can continue. So these are some of the things to show that there's no actual difference pertaining to these affairs. And some of those mashayikh that made a distinguishment, they did make a distinguishment, but even some of the people that claim to follow them, you find that they even use the still images for this affair or that affair. And so he's not really following the shaykh. And another thing is people now have begun to miss out what a lot of these affairs are mentioned, and some of the harms, and what some of the scholars mentioned for the greater benefit, to the point that we see more negative than good in some of these things. And as we know, that there has to be saddu dharaya, there has to be closing the door. A lot of harm has come through this because of people being so loose. More harm has come through these affairs, and we see it now. We see now women coming on stage, giving lectures through videos, and everybody just comes to listen to her while she's not, some of them not even properly dressed, or even some of them are young and giving a voice of fitna, softening their voice. And all of these affairs come where we see more harm than good in these type of affairs. So this is something to remember. And also Shaykh Abdul Razak Al-Badr, just one more thing that he was asked this question about the topic. Just want to mention his fatwa again.
أحسن الله إليك. أكثر الأسئلة جاءت عن تصوير الجوال. هل التصوير يعم الجوال الفوتوغرافي الكاميرا الفيديو؟
الصحيح أن الأمر على عمومه في الحديث. الأمر على عمومه في كل ما كان صورة لذوات الروح، لا يستثنى من ذلك إلا ما كان للضرورة.
So he was asked about video photography or video cameras. He said, what's apparent is that it's the correct opinion, that it's upon the generality, is not permissible except for durura. So a person may ask, what about, is it possible that some of these mashayikh may change their opinions? Yes, it's possible. But most of the times, these mashayikh, they change their opinion and confine it to something specific, maybe for da'wah or for this, not to what people are doing of that's loose. And at the same time, it's upon you to follow the haqq. If someone changes their opinion, follow that which is correct of the truth. And some of these other mashayikh, some of them, they may even come and they don't even have a stance, or they're just refraining. For that reason, they may appear. I'll give you an example. Shaykh Salih Suhaimi. Sorry.
صلى الله عليكم. يقول السائل الكريم الفقيه، يقول الأمور بمقاصدها. شيخنا، لو صورنا هذه الحلقة بواسطة كاميرا الفيديو وذهبنا بهذه الصورة إلى بلادنا وشرحنا إلى المسلمين درسك هذا، أليس كنا قد أحسننا؟
بعض العلماء يستثني نقل الفيديو أو التلفاز لأنه نقل للواقع، ولكني أنا أتوقف في هذه المسألة. نعم.
So someone asked, oh Shaykh, if we were to make this halaqah through a video and recording and sending it back to our people, wouldn't we be doing something good in that? So Shaykh said, some ulama, they see that, but he says, as for me, I hold back. I hold back. So some of these mashayikh, they hold back, even for their circles. But if they probably go somewhere or something, because of them holding back, they may not prevent. But this is just their opinion, so a person understands. But it's upon a person to, in all cases, follow what she deems to be correct and follow the truth. Another thing I want to mention, this topic is some of these people, they don't realize that the khilaf is something that is mustajad, something that's new, a new khilaf. Shaykh Abdullah ibn Humayd, he mentions that the surah it is haram, and he's speaking about photographs. And he says those who say, it's just a habsul dhil, or confining the shadow or this and that, is not correct. He said this is هذا غلط. بل الحديث تدل على منع المجسم وغير المجسم. The hadith are general. And he quotes a statement saying إن الأئمة الأربع مجمعون على تحريم الصور سواء كان لها ظل أو لا. The four great imams of the past, so the four great imams, they were of the past, they would deem that taswir is haram for whether that has a shadow or not. So he mentions this is the four great imams of the past as well. And even so he's using this as a proof that photography is haram and so forth. As well, I want to mention another thing too, that some of these mashayikh that permitted it as well, they permit restrictions, and they've criticized what some people have taken the videos and cameras even to the masjid or to the places that are muqaddas, sacred places, Masjid al-Haram and so forth. They criticize this. They said this leads to showing off. And even some people, now they went to a level that you have to see the face of the imam when he's leading. Shaykh Salih Fawzan was asked about this. We will play.
هذا السائل يقول انتشر بين بعض أئمة المساجد تصوير أنفسهم في الصلاة، فإن بعضهم يظهر وجهه أثناء التصوير، فما رأي سماحتكم في هذا العمل؟
هذا رياء ولا يجوز.
Shaykh Fawzan was asked about how some of the cameras are placed on the person leading the salat, to see the person's face and so forth. And here, most of the time, this can lead to showing off. The Shaykh says this is a form of showing off, especially the person initiating this and wants to be seen like this. It can affect people's intentions. And the Shaykh speaking about most of the case scenarios, really it does have an effect on people's intentions. So to be on the safer side, a person would always avoid this, especially with the affair of picture taking. We know the ruling, and this is something that needs to be clarified, inshallah. I wanted to mention another affair that some of the people, they use these apps, Instagram, Snapchat, and the women sometimes they come and they use it as well. Shaykh Ali Tuwajiri has some beautiful speech, inshallah if it gets translated, about women coming and displaying their images on Snapchat and Instagram and displaying their beauty and exposing themselves. He warns from this act. We've seen the harm of it. So the woman needs to pay attention to this affair. As well, I want to mention Shaykh Salih al-Uthaymeen, that some people as well use as a reference of the mashayikh that hold this view. So I just wanted to mention what his view was concerning this topic.
ومن الثاني عند أهل العلم ما يتعلق بالتعليم وأنه من باب الحاجات، لكن محله في الأظهر في من يحتاج الناس إلى علمه، أما من لا يحتاج الناس إلى علمه فهو في غنى عن التصوير.
So Shaykh Salih al-Uthaymeen here, he clarifies when he's speaking about the affair of tasweer for da'wah and so forth. He says this is confined to a person that the people actually need his knowledge. Now you find all different types of people coming up. People are not even in need of his knowledge, and he wants to come online and display his image. He's not even someone important and so forth. And then at the same time they give a reference back to the Shaykh. So they're not following the stance of the Shaykh, nor in reality they're following the correct opinion of the generality of the proofs that show the impermissibility of picture taking. As well as Shaykh Salih al-Uthaymeen, he mentioned some benefit here as well.
التي يدرسها الطلبة هذه يحتاج الناس فيها إلى الصورة لبيان هذه المعارف والعلوم على وجه مناسب لهم، فمثل هذا مما ترتفع فيه الحرمة، وما عدا ذلك يبقى على حرمته. ثم بعض الناس يقول إذا ذكر هذا الكلام يمسك بعد الدرس يقول المسألة مختلف فيها. طيب جزاك الله خير، أنت تقول المسألة مختلف فيها، ألا تعلم الناس الوراء؟ ايش رايكم الناس يربون على الورع ولا على خلاف الورع؟
So the Shaykh mentions the exception that he sees, and he says whatever is beyond that is haram. And then he says some people will come to you after the dars and say, but the issue is khilaf. He says, okay, are you going to teach people to follow the khilaf or follow that which is more of an affair of wara', to be God conscious and God fearing, and follow that which you know that is closer to the affair of taqwa?
ليش يربون الناس على الورع؟ حتى يقوى دينهم بلا ورع لا دين يبقى.
He said you should be cultivating the people not to follow mas'alas of khilafs and so forth. Let them follow that which is more cautious and affair of deeming that which is correct, not just leaning to khilaf. So this is some good advice, especially of those who use these issues of khilaf. We always remind them al-hujja fi kitabillah wa sunnat Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The main proof is in the book of Allah and the sunnah. Always people, they differ. People are going to change and have different stance. One time they're going to say this. Just stick to the Quran and Sunnah. You know that what you deem to be the truth will remain as the truth. And the people concerning this topic, Shaykh Abdurrahman al-Barraq, he mentioned there are various groups. That some people, he says, they're ulama mujtahidun fi ma'rifat al-haq. They're muta'awwilun. This is their ijtihad. This is what they led to. He said, وَهَذَا الصِّنْفُ قَلِيل. Few of them. So that's why we told you the majority of the scholars, if you really count them, you look where the ulama, even in the time of India, Pakistan, or even in Egypt, or even as we mentioned, the Mashayikh of Yemen, a lot of the Shaykh of Saudiya, a lot of them are inclining to avoid this. And even some of those who they permitted with a number of restrictions. So this is something to remember. Then he said number 2, he goes, علماء مجتهدون متأثرون في اجتهادهم بضغط الواقع وشيء من الهوى. Ulama that are mujtahid but affected by, their ijtihad is affected by the pressure of society and also something of whims. And then he also says, the third category, مقلدون بحسن النية. Some of the group of the people are people that are blind following but with a good intention. And he said some people, and regarding this topic, مقلدون مع الشهوة وهوى وهؤلاء يكثرون في المنتسبين إلى العلم والدين. And some of them are blind followers but with some whims and desires. And these people, there are many who ascribe to knowledge and religion. And then he mentioned the 5th one, متبعون لأهوائهم. Some of them are following their desires. They don't care if the tasweer is haram or halal. The main thing is just it suits them. This is something to remember. These are words of advice. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to benefit of this topic and to make us people that realize the seriousness of this matter and to follow that which is haqq and truth. Allahumma arina al-haqqa haqqan wa ruzukna ittiba'ah. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to show the truth as the truth for us and to allow us to follow it and see falsehood as falsehood and to allow us to avoid it. With this we end. Subhanakallahumma bihamdik. Nashhadu an la ilaha illa ant. Wa nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Barakallahu fikum.